Yes, it's terrific. We've got a question up on the board and we're already seeing some answers. Which aspects of this webinar people are most interested to see? And I can see the scores are coming in, which is terrific. As the attendee numbers climb, so do the scores coming in. So today, we are delighted to welcome Don Mahan and John Hack, who will be talking about artificial intelligence projects. They're a really excellent catch, and just to add to the bonuses that we're bringing you today, they are offering to stay on for a little bit after 6 o'clock and answer more questions if we haven't got through all the questions. And depending on the numbers of people on the call at that time, we may be able to open some of the microphones. I'm not sure whether we will. I'm going to leave the question up, but John's going to take over and show the first slide of the presentation while I do a couple of introductions.
Welcome, everyone. So, as you know, this is about artificial intelligence projects and how they are different and some things you need to know in order to succeed. As you may recall from the promotional material that went out about the workshop, we're really trying to accomplish 5 things here, which is helping you understand the different types of AI projects, the differences between AI projects and typical tech projects, including some special challenges you may face and how to deal with them. We're going to share real life stories, and at the end we've got some interesting pro tips for pioneering project managers.
Introduction to Dawn and John. It's up there already. Dawn is founder of PMO Training and its divisions, the Project Guru Academy and the Project Gurus. Before leaving a project leadership role in the Fortune 50 in 2009, she was a Fortune 500 PMO leader, a senior business IT consultant, assistant actuary, and biostatistician. Today, she is an international speaker, award-winning consultant, and coined the term Project Land. Her work has been featured in international press such as MarketWatch, Morningstar, Yahoo Finance. She's author of the upcoming book, Meet the Players in Project Land, Decide the Right Project Roles, and Get People on Board. John Hack has a deep background in performance analysis. His early work in natural language processing, data visualization, and real-time risk analysis led to delivering predictive and automated analysis of financial performance, for which he earned 3 patents. At SAP, he led the Performance Management Innovations team as they researched new ways to understand individual performance and visualize workforce strategy. He is currently the CTO and co-founder of Inflection, leveraging AI to help aspiring professionals to develop their interpersonal skills. He holds a bachelor's degree from MIT and a master's from NYU. His studies focused on economics, management, computer science, artificial intelligence, and advanced analytics. With all that in mind, please feel free to send questions in, which I will interrupt if I feel that we can bring them into the conversation, and otherwise I will store up till the end. Thank you very much. Over to you.
So Dr. Hugo, I think you have Mentimeter for us, and some folks have already enjoyed participating. So about the workshop, 5 items, what we'd love to hear is from you. Right, wow.
Is that showing what we wanted to show? There's a good spread. People are interested in all of the topics, which is terrific.
That means we have a good agenda for today, so that's good. Whew!
Yeah, we'd had everybody wanted to just hear about the 3 different project types. We might have to do some song and dance.
Yeah. But, not the first time we've had to dance together, John, so that's good.
That's true. That's true. So
I'm so excited, everybody, to be here with John again today. Once in a great while, we get a chance to speak together, and it's always a real pleasure. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. To our wonderful hosts here, Maya and Dr. Hugo, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your amazing audience. I hear over 800 people registered, something like that. So that's amazing. And so just fill in a little time while you guys participate and let us know what you're most interested in. We see the numbers are still going. But John, when we were prepping, I remember I was asking you, hey, wait a minute. So Agile is not new. Artificial intelligence is not new. How long have you been doing this? And I fell off my chair.
Well, I wrote my first computer program in 1971, but I didn't work in the field professionally until 1982. So I've been at this, 40 or 50 years, depending on how you look at it. And, I've seen a lot of trends and a lot of technologies come and go along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I started teaching Agile and getting into Agile, I was like, like we've been doing this for a long time. We called it common sense, but artificial intelligence recently exploded. And so I'm glad you finally get, to talk about some of the things that you've been doing for so long to people on a more mainstream level.
No, it's great, Dawn, because there have been some recent breakthroughs that have allowed it to move it from like interesting niche use cases to having widespread applicability across lots of business processes. So that has made things, very interesting for those of us who've been in it. It's like walking along a lonely road and being joined by a parade.
Yeah, that's exactly, I guess what it's at. That's perfect. I love it. I love it. So it looks like the difference is leading typical tech versus AI projects is winning right now. But yeah, as Dr. Hugo said, it looks like everybody's interested in everything. So that's awesome news. Thanks everybody for participating. We have a few more opportunities along the way to have you participate in the Mentimeter polls. We love the engagement. We love to hear from you. So please light up the chat and the questions through our webinar, and we'll get to everything that we can. But we really love hearing from all of you out there. We're used to doing things in person, so we like to make it as much in person as engaging as we can, given the technology. But we're joining you from the U.S. And in chat, if it's possible for you to let us know where you are, we would love to hear that as well. So with that, should we take back over and get into the first big topic, which is some useful categories. So in artificial intelligence, there's been just a lot of like the big umbrella header of artificial intelligence, but John has a few categories just so that you guys all know what we're talking about when we make it a little bit more specific that he'd like to share with you. John?
Yeah, so we're not going to try and teach all about AI and try to cover everything in the field. But this breakdown, I think, is useful for project managers for two reasons. First, with all projects, you start with a business goal and an understanding the processes you're either trying to automate or improve or whatever. So you want to make sure you choose the appropriate technology based on what you're trying to accomplish. And the second reason is that the risk profiles of these technologies vary. So generative AI is the one that's getting all of the press these days, ChatGPT and Midjourney and all of that good stuff. But it is unexplainable. So if you're in a field like loans, where it's important for you to explain how your decisions are made to the regulatory bodies, you might not want to use a generative AI in that environment. Analytic AI is more formulaic, based on heuristics and rules-based systems. And then there's a whole bunch of other things going on out there with robotics and process automation. Natural language processing is all put into a category of its own for a variety of reasons. And we'll touch on more details. But when you're talking to business people, I find that these are very useful differentiations that they, on the business side, can understand and how you're using it. So because it's so popular, we do talk about generative AI a little bit more than some of the others here, but Dawn and I were talking recently, and Dawn, you asked me about ChatGPT, and
Yeah, we were just having a really fun conversation about it. And again, like John is usually, he's fairly, serious and stoic and whatever, but he has this wonderful ability to just make me laugh. And so this was one of them. And I said, oh, we have to share this. So I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but I love to live on the edge. So John, I was like, John, how do you describe it? And he says, mansplaining as a service. So somebody said that to you. Is that right?
That's right. I didn't originate that, but because it's so confident and it's sometimes so flagrantly wrong that I thought it was like a really good summarization of what ChatGPT and Bard and the others are really doing. So with that little bit of humor, I thought we could immediately jump into the three different kinds of projects. Is that our?
Yeah,
does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely.
we've been we saw some interest in that, and so AI is not new. AI goes back to the very earliest days of computer science, Claude Shannon and Alan Turing and all those folks in the earliest days of developing algorithms. But today, in terms of projects, we see three different kinds of projects. In particular, they differ in their risk profiles and in the kinds of work breakdown structures that you have to look at. The first is buying something that's commercially available. A really good example of this is document summary services, or services that can turn unstructured documents into structured data. So you can take all those old documents you had that people had filled out and they were in PDFs or whatever, and turn it into databases that you can query. Another one is sentiment analysis for your marketing organization. And tell us, are people saying nice things about us on the internet, or are they saying mean things about us on the internet? Those are things you can just buy. They're commercially available. And the other end of the spectrum is build your own. And this is really investing in developing AI tech of your own. In financial services, that would be something like fraud detection, where you've got all of this data about transactions, and you've already got data that's tagged as having been a fraudulent transaction, and you can train a model on identifying the fraud. And we're going to get into some real detail on the risk profiles and the work breakdown structure changes that you're going to need for those kinds of projects. But others include recommendation engines, predictive maintenance. So I know Hugo told me that we should expect that there's some number of folks from the nuclear engineering world on here, and if you've got a lot of operating data for your power plants, and you might want to try to understand patterns in those data around what might go well and what might not go well before things become problematic. And finally, there's hybrid. And hybrid is you combine these things. You buy some components, you may build some of your own components, and those could be the analytic AI, where it's algorithmic and rules-based, or it could be developing your own machine models. And those are becoming more popular as the different components become available. And an example from my experience is the Interflection, my current company, where we use commercially available natural language processing large language models, and then we combine that with our own sets of rules-based systems in order to analyze speech. What are people talking about? And are they, expressing ideas effectively? So you can't do it with just a machine model, and you cannot do it with just a rules-based system. It requires both.
So we have a Mentimeter poll to see and hear from you what you're seeing so far in your world. So are you seeing buy? Are you seeing build? Or are you seeing a hybrid? So we'd love to hear from you. So maybe Dr. Hugo, if you can get that to come up. Yeah, which types of AI projects do you recognize in your experience? And maybe you're just here getting ready. Maybe you're getting ready and you're not seeing any yet, and that's okay too. In fact, we give you rounds of applause for getting ready for this. If you're here doing that, which looks like so far, that's what some of you are doing is just getting ready for the AI to come. It's awesome.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Dawn, that a lot of organizations, the AI is coming in sort of through the back door. The marketing organization is using ChatGPT to create first drafts of marketing materials, and the design group is using the generative images from DALL-E or Midjourney to, jumpstart their graphical design work. And so, as a project manager, you may find that you're working with groups that are already using it, and how do you incorporate, it may come to you from the outside. It may not come to you as an AI project. It may come to you as like, hey, we need to do some work in the user experience, and you go to the design team and they're already using AI to develop the user experience. So
yeah, and the other thing happens to us too, which just recently happened with a client where one of the business folks, in asking questions around, what are your goals for the next year and whatever, and they were like, an AI project. And so the question we always ask in response to that is, what is the problem you're trying to solve with the AI? Because it's like, to do AI for AI's sake, I don't understand. That's like, back in the day, it would have been like,
right.
to do sequel, like, but for what? So there's, because it's so popular now, if you end up with these questions like, hey, we need to do an AI project, okay, but where is the opportunity in our organization? We will have some ideas for you later through all our conversation here, but watch out for that one. That one seems to be popular right now too. And then actually for this client situation, it just sort of faded away because the person had no idea, which happened.
Okay, so I think we've got a sense of where things are at. Maybe we can switch back to the mainstream.
Yeah, thanks for participating, everybody. Really, really interesting. So again, we have the whole board lit up here. Yeah. So with that, maybe we can talk a little bit about the differences between leading a typical tech project and an AI project. So I haven't been at this as quite as long as you, but I've been at it for a while. And I, when we first started to talk about it, I'm like, how is that any different than any other tech project? Like, tech projects are hard. I mean, tech projects are just hard, and they're always hard, and there are always some funky things that go on with them. But we want to highlight for you guys what are some very specific things that sometimes it's just on steroids, like there's your typical project problem, and then there's the AI problem, which makes it on steroids. But let's talk about some of those key differences, John. Can you take us through them?
Sure. So, unintended consequences, we've all had unintended consequences in projects. And Dawn, you were telling me about a technology that was around for, how many years? The early release of prisoners problem?
Yes. So I did a talk on epic project fails. Okay. And in my research for that, I discovered an article about a state, not to be named, that had coded the algorithm wrong to calculate the release of prisoners. So for 15 years, if I'm remembering correctly, prisoners were being released early because somebody was bad at math. So later it was discovered and they were able to fix the algorithm.
And that is one of the big differences between something like face recognition failures. They were able to go in, find the line of code that was at fault and fix that one line of code and move on. These large models, whether they're language models or image models or whatever, are unexplainable. There is no line of code that you can go to fix a bug. So if your facial recognition software, whether it's something you've leased from a a provider or you're building it yourself, and I'm not recommending it necessarily, I'm just using it as an example, you can't know why it makes the decisions it makes. And you can't fix the problems without basically retraining the model. And it is the ultimate black box. There is no way to inspect, even if you wanted to do a white box QA exercise, you cannot do that with AI. Unlike, if you're again, I know we have folks from the nuclear world, you have control systems that I would bet are scrutinized in detail by very experienced software developers to look for flaws in the algorithms. And that's just not something you can do with AI, at least with the large models that are based on data. And we're not going to get into details of machine learning models and backpropagation and all of that, but that's just not possible. And that kind of feeds into the environmental, social, and governance risk issues that we see today, where you can introduce bias. So for example, I know organizations that use AI to sort resumes for people who are applying to the company, and the AI models, turns out that what appears to be happening inside the models is that they have somehow gleaned signifiers for race, signifiers for class that aren't explicit. So even if you don't identify the race of the person in the resume, it somehow has figured that out from other patterns in the data. And it opens you up to real problems with the legal system and with regulatory bodies if you are in practice and eliminating people from consideration, whether you intend to or not, based on their race, based on their class, and so forth. And a lot of organizations have had to rethink their use. And I know one that went back to a little bit more manual process of resume evaluation to make sure that they weren't relying on the algorithms purely to provide those. And then there's future shock. This technology is changing really rapidly. Even those of us who work in the field, I think many of us were caught off guard at the popularity of ChatGPT version 3 point whatever it was that came out back in November. And ChatGPT had been around for a while doing what it does, and for some reason it sort of crossed a quality threshold back in November of last year that it became wildly popular, and it made a lot of other technologies irrelevant. And Dawn, you tell your story. You told your story of there was some widget.
Oh yeah. So we were running in the Fortune 500. We were running this program that was a global program, giant, 100 people working on it all over the world. And it was a multi-year journey to transform the way pricing was done in the organization. And the plan, our project plan, included a build. So we talked before about buy, build, hybrid, right? It included a build of this widget. And by the time we got to that part in the plan, the guides came to me and they were really nervous. And they said, Dawn, we have news. I'm like, is it good news or bad news? They're like, we're not sure. And they said, well, we found this widget for $100 that we could buy instead of building this thing. I said, that is great news. I'm like, here's my credit card. Go buy it. Let's do this, right? And so it was a wonderful opportunity because the technology had changed since our plan had been inked, and they were a little worried, about my reaction. But I was so happy because it saved us so much time and money, and we were able to repurpose that time and money for other things.
And an example with AI, because it's so much more powerful, it can take over significant jobs that are being planned for. So you might be training your design team to use the generative image AIs so that they can, stop using copyrighted materials, and suddenly Adobe announces that Photoshop now includes generative AI capabilities. How do you as a project manager deal with that kind of sophisticated functionality just being built into an existing product that your people already know? How does that change the processes by which they work and so forth? So
yeah, it's something, when that happened to me, that was many, many years ago now. I started to notice, for any projects that it was like bleeding edge type project, where the area was fairly new in tech, I started to mention this, like, watch out for this. This could happen, so that we don't build something that will be commercially available for $100. But this is one of those on steroids situations here, where you really, really have to be monitoring this. Like my dad monitors the weather, right? Like you have to be all over this every day, basically, it feels like, to know whether or not, there's something out there that's changed. Because in the case of spending lots of time and money teaching a group of people to do something, and then the tool that they already know becomes, it's embedded in it, it's like, okay, well, time out, what are we going to do about this? And helping as a leader, project managers are leaders, so as a leader in the organization, making sure that it gets monitored, the situation gets monitored. So you have the guy like my dad monitoring the weather, like there is somebody that's going to be monitoring this if it's not you, and making sure that you have those conversations about, okay, well, what do we do? Do we continue? Do we stop? And we move over? Do we, what do we do about this? So encourage you to really watch out for this one.
And just one addition to that, Dawn, is that the regulatory and legal environment around these technologies is also changing with that level of rapidity. So you have to make sure, like that you keep an eye on those aspects as well, because they're, frankly, legislatures work more slowly than the technology organizations, and they might catch up to you with some uncomfortably difficult regulations along the way. So it's worth knowing what they're up to as well. But since we're starting to talk about risks, maybe we ought to jump into the heart of today's presentation, which is the 5 special challenges.
Yes, so be paying close attention to these next 5 special challenges, because we will be asking you what you're seeing in your world, and you got a little preview of how we're going to ask you, so in a range. So that was actually useful. So let's get into the 5 special challenges. So special challenge number 1 is about output quality and consistency, and this is most important if your organization is scaling. Is that right?
That's where you're most often going to see this as a problem, because the whole goal of scaling a process, right, is to turn over some tasks to the technology so that you don't have to have people as part of the solution. Because if you want to go from processing 50 loans a day to 5,000 loans a day, you either have to hire 100 times as many people, or you have to automate that process. So yes, scaling is usually where you see this, although you can see it even in areas where it's just being used as an augmentation. And we'll talk about this in a lot more detail. So it's not like a transaction processing system. You're not going to get the same answer. For those of you who've used ChatGPT, you may have noticed that if you ask it the same question twice, you will get 2 different answers. And it's actually almost impossible to get it to answer the same interesting question the same way, identically the same way. It just doesn't, and there are reasons built in for why it does that. It even seeds each response with a random element to ensure that it does not give you the same answer every time, which is kind of interesting.
It's interesting, but it's completely disconcerting for people like me that, so I have a mathematics degree, right? And it's like 2 + 2 is 4, and 2 + 2 is always 4.
Right.
Right, when you're dealing with the, the financial folks and the accountants and that kind of mindset, the math people, right? You're going to have a challenge in working with this stuff because you can't prove it and you don't get the same answer every time. Is that, and you had a story about this, I think.
So there's a couple of things that I'm going to share a couple of stories here with folks. Let's talk about quality for a moment. We talked about how this is a black box, right? So for when you're using these models, you may have to get into the world of statistical quality control. And that means you need to know what your quality constraints are, and you have to know what your acceptable levels of false positive and false negatives are. And that balance is going to depend on your application, right? False negatives in a nuclear plant could mean failing to identify a dangerous situation. False positives in a rare disease, it could create expensive and risky procedures that are unnecessary. So you need to make sure when you train the models that you have both training and testing data, and that they are not the same data sets. You can't test with the data that you trained the model with. I know that seems obvious in retrospect, but it happens. And there are more sophisticated ways of doing that, breaking up the data into multiple sets and doing multiple training sessions. But the main thing you need to be aware of is something called oversampling, where you give it so much data that it overfits, in the sense that the model is specifically designed for that data set, and that any data that might be outside of that model is going to be highly problematic. And that's why testing is so important. So, build statistical control into the project after it goes live. So here's a useful tip. So, even though you're confident in the model, make sure that you continue to spot check the model. If you've got, and claims processing, I have a fair amount of experience in the financial services world. When you're doing, claims processing or loan application processing, you want to make sure that you're continually, just like you would in a manufacturing situation, look for the quality of the output and making sure that it is doing what it is supposed to do. And did it hit its goals or not? So and there are other clever ways to deal with the output quality problem. And you're probably wondering how to make $50,000 in 5 minutes. And I didn't actually make it for myself. I made it for a customer. We were working with the Office of Finance in a Fortune 500 company, and they had very high capital costs and highly variable revenue. And we were developing these, machine learning models, basically, that would analyze their finances and could, make projections on revenue, which was really important to them. And talking to the controller, he's like, "This is great, but there's no way we could ever use this. My CFO, if I can't tie it out to the penny and the whys and the wherefores, there's no way that we're going to use this." And I said to him, "Look, we can do something completely different. Instead of using the predictions, why don't we use it to identify where you're likely to be able to make money and where you're likely to have things stay the same?" And he got back to me a few days later. He said, "Hey, the system identified one thing. I made a 5-minute call to the division headquartered in San Francisco, and we put $50,000 on the bottom line based on that insight." But it didn't require them to use the prediction directly. It allowed them to identify areas of interest that they could follow up on. And I think that's a
when
key.
We talked about this, it's huge, right? So when we talked about this, I was like, oh, so you're saying this is the rock to look under. And then
Right.
I said, it sounds like you made this guy $50,000 in 5 minutes. And then you were like, oh, let's create an image around that. And then we played with it, right? And so I see that the image you ended up with, how many takes was it, do you think, to get this?
It was actually just a couple of takes, but it generates 4 images per take. So that was one of 8. What happened? We just lost? No. We're
No,
still
I've
good,
just
right?
joined you to pass on a question.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
So Robert said in his area of work, he deploys AI for analyzing medical images, think X-rays,
Yep.
CTs, and so on. Our biggest challenges are the evidence base and benefits gap, regulatory landscape that can't catch up to the product market, and a procurement strategy, and also a general knowledge gap.
So, like, if I understand the question correctly, what you're saying is, what might be a creative way to work within this, environment where you've got regulatory issues and you've got uh, uh, an audience. And by the way, having worked a little bit in healthcare, I do find that the healthcare world, there's a lot of people who are not tech, especially information tech savvy in that world. And what might be creative ways of using the technology. First of all, I don't have experience with medical imaging directly, so I'm kind of winging it here. But I can imagine going to someone and saying, like, would triage be useful in the sense that we're not telling you whether this is a definite positive or a definite negative, but rather we've got three classes of output. One, which is you really need to take a look at this. A second, which is, we don't know what's going on here. And a third one, which is we can't see anything in the data here. And, providing it that way. The other is there another use case altogether? Like, are they interested in, how these images might relate to outcomes more broadly? So for the ones that, again, I'm not sure I'm answering the question there.
Well, it sounds
That's absolutely great. Carry on. I think it was more of a comment saying he's
Okay.
got some challenges, and he was just sharing the
Okay.
challenges.
And I'm going to talk about regulatory environments and ways you can deal with that in just a moment. So
lots more tips coming up here. Thanks
yep.
for sharing that, and best wishes to you as well.
So I
So
want
number two is big data means big investment. Did you have any thoughts?
this one, and I know we're already 40 minutes into the hour, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but there's a few things I do want to highlight, which is that you have a whole new level of effort around training AI models. By the way, congratulations for those of you who are doing these kinds of projects. You have a unique data set that no one else has, and you may learn things and put products onto the market that no one else can. So this is like a really powerful thing if you get it right. But quality and consistency, can't mention that. Expect QA to take a lot of time. Training data needs to be labeled. You may have a lot of, say, loan application data that's already labeled. You may have a lot of data that is not labeled. You don't know whether, this data means this particular, string of numbers or set of numbers means a good outcome or a bad outcome, and you need to have humans label it. Like when Google first started doing its cat identification algorithm. They had to, have people on the internet identify whether this is a cat or not. And they needed, in the early days, they needed like 1 million answers before the model got any good at all. That takes a lot of time. So the world of, and this is the third point, algorithms and models and hyperparameters. Oh my. Machine learning models have a lot of setup work that's required. There are a lot of decisions to be made about the specific models that you're going to be using, the algorithms within those models that you're going to be using, and the hyperparameters that are used to sort of like start the model before you feed it the training data. I worked with a very large project that was looking at the production of natural resources from a wide variety of extraction efforts worldwide, and trying to figure out, like, from a geological perspective, which of these were going to be more productive than others. And they had tremendous number of amount of information about the nature of the geological formations and the historical outputs and all of that. And everybody thought this was going to be great, and it was, but it took many, many months of just fiddling with, oh, this algorithm didn't meet the quality criteria, so we're going to try this other algorithm. Ooh, this model's working great. Let's make sure we get the hyperparameters right. And the tuning took many, many months, much to the frustration of the business users. Fortunately, we had buy-in. We kept them apprised of what we were doing, so they were patient capital, as it were. But be aware that that's not something you typically worry about in an IT project. Is that level of, we'll call it research, going on. Aligning skills with tasks. Was working on a separate project. We had it was a lot of consumer financial data, and the data scientist, he was a PhD from Carnegie Mellon, really smart guy, really great guy, spending all of his time scrubbing data, having to, because whenever you have lots of it's like a CRM system, right? The data is always kind of weird, and cleaning it up, and there was a lot of it. He got very frustrated, and he almost quit because he wasn't actually doing data science. He had this high-powered degree. He wanted to be doing data science, and he was thinking he was coming into an environment where he was going to be given this large set of data, and he'd be analyzing it, and he was instead given this large set of data, and he spent all his time cleaning it. So make sure that you know what tasks are coming up, and that data cleansing is going to take a long time if you don't have stuff that's already really clean. And finally, compute time. Those models that he was running, he would kick it off in the afternoon, and we'd come back in the morning to see what the output was. And when you have those kinds of cycles combined with all of the changes in models and algorithms and hyperparameters, months can go by before you figure out what really, you get a model that's really highly tuned. Those models like ChatGPT out there, they literally spend millions of dollars just on raw compute time, basically electricity bills, to get those models in place. Millions. That's not an exaggeration.
So, and we're going to switch to the next one for time's sake here, is also about big data. And while we switch over to that, I just want to mention, so as a former database administrator, I remember doing a lot of cleaning up of data. And so again, this is one of those problems on steroids, where if you've been in tech for a while, then anytime you've got big data sets, you have to watch out for things like taking a lot of time to clean up the data. But this is just a whole other level of pain. And I just want to upvote what you were saying too about your PhD data scientist. I mean, these folks, right, paid way too much money for this PhD from an Ivy League institution to clean data, right? Let alone almost using him. So, so more things to watch out for as the project manager. Move on to number 3, which is big data also means big risks.
Yeah, and we've touched on this. And if you're and those of you in the European Union, you've got a much tighter regulatory environment than those of us in the U.S. But in any case, you should be very careful.
So this one, can you give the credit card data example for this one?
Yeah, I was working in a financial institution. We had access to a very large set of credit card data, and basically, I had to make friends with the chief compliance officer because, we had a level of detail about people's spending behavior at an individual level that was very revealing if you ran these algorithms on it. And so, to the person who's working in a regulated environment, I can't recommend highly enough, get to know your compliance officer, get to know the regulations. People were the regulatory framework for our project was 1,200-page document, and I read the whole thing and I knew it. So that made me very popular with the compliance people because I knew what the parameters were that we had to work within. If you don't have those kinds of regulations in place, make sure you do. in any case, you want to put controls in your project, Sarbanes-Oxley style controls around processes. Who gets to see the data? Who gets to use the data in what ways? Auditing queries, all of that, to make sure that everything is clean. And we had the compliance officer as a stakeholder on the project, so that there were never any surprises on anyone's part. So that I think those are really important things.
It's great advice, John. I mean, we've also had, as part of the project, non-disclosure agreements, and for the team members to sign and put on file that they promised that they would use the data for good and not evil, essentially. So
Yeah.
just for giggles, can you give us an example? I think you had dropped one on me and it was just a little shocking. Like, when you say, can you imagine what you would learn? Like, can you give us a little juicy tidbit of what you can imagine you can learn?
I'm not sure I should go down that rabbit hole here, but let's just say that the algorithm was able to really identify clusters of people, and well, you know what? This was not us. This was not something we did. This became public. Target was using buyer data to target advertising, and there was an infamous case a few years ago where a woman was suddenly being blizzarded with baby items, cribs, and that sort of thing, and she did not yet know she was pregnant. And that's how she found out that she was pregnant, was that Target was sending her information about her, her upcoming child and the things she should buy for it.
Shocking.
So, and I have personally seen things come through recommendation engines for me that literally shocked me. It's like, wow, Facebook should not know that. It wasn't anything bad. It's just, like, wow, that's like way too much detail.
Right.
So
be careful, everybody.
Yeah, and the other, and I know we're going to have to go fast through the next few slides, but I want to mention one more thing, which is that executives and managers tend to use information one of three ways: to justify decisions they've already made, to make decisions they might want to avoid making themselves, and to inform a decision as part of a more rigorous exercise. That last one is not common enough, and you should be aware that if you're putting things out there, there will be people using the information for less than optimal decision-making processes. So with that, I'm going to jump to we have a bonus slide here for you, which is some of the risks of generative AI. And while this isn't specific to project management, I think that these are important things for you as project managers to know, because project managers always get involved in everything. So do not provide personal or confidential data to these models. ChatGPT can use anything you type to it to update its models. So be careful with that. They call them hallucinations, but they are fabrications. There were some lawyers this spring who were involved in a lawsuit around someone who's injured on an airplane by a beverage cart. And they asked ChatGPT about precedents, and it talked about this case, and they asked for details about the case, and it was all completely made up by ChatGPT, who thought it was being friendly and helpful, but it wasn't a real case. And they filed that with the judge and got in real serious, professional hot water because of filing false documents to the court. So you have to fact check everything. It's a jumpstart. That image, I don't know if you've been reading what the prompt was for that image that that's up there on the screen. That's supposed to be a 55-year-old female Hispanic boss and a 45-year-old Pakistani male computer technician talking. I'm not going to try and deconstruct the ways in which that is so terribly wrong, but be aware that that kind of bias can work its way into the things that your marketing department or even internal communications could create. So you have to review for hidden and visible bias. Validate any output you can't validate yourself with SMEs. Avoid copyright issues. Right now in the United States, the law is things that are generated by you, are not copyrightable. That are generated by the AI on your behalf are not copyrightable because they're not created by a human. But if you ask it to create marketing copy in the style of Ed Sheeran, which you can do, by the way, it's fun, but that, you run a risk that Ed Sheeran could sue you for copyright infringement. So stick with Shakespeare and other folks and just reprompt, re-edit, wordsmith. It is really important that you use this as a first draft. If you modify it meaningfully, that's fine, but if you don't, remember to provide attribution that you're using AI. That's the ethically right thing to do. Okay, so we're almost there. We're running short on time. You're getting into some new territory here. Problem is, most of your sponsors want certainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty, as we discussed before. So, instead of just having a standard stage gate, go kill decision process, you might want to introduce pivot as an opportunity at every stage gate. For those of you who are using stage gate projects, that pivot is really important. Let me give you an example. We were working in that office of finance. We did a lot of work with different offices of finances. It wasn't the same company, but we were doing budget projections, revenue projections. And again, they weren't comfortable with AI-generated budgets. But what we were able to do is say, look, what we can do is we can compare the budgets that are being submitted by all the divisions to the budgets that the AI says are most likely given historical patterns in the company. And we can identify those people who are submitting budgets that are like out of sync with what historical trends would match. And they were like, that's awesome. Because we don't have time to look at everybody's budget, but if you can tell us whose budget we should be looking at most closely and whose budgets look good just out of the box, that'll save us a lot of time and give us a lot more bang for our buck. So, that was a pivot in the project, literally, where we gave up on the idea of automatically generating budgets and instead gave a decision tool to the finance group for budget analysis. And last, by no means least, Scrum is your friend. I don't need to explain Scrum to most of you, and you can all look it up. But really, short defined cycles. And for those of you who have not worked with discovery-driven planning, the basic idea is your sprints, as it were, should be focused, in the short run on the highest risk or most uncertain aspects of your project to continually reduce risk. And that's incredibly important in these kinds of projects. And I think if I keep going at this pace, we'll be able to get through all the key stuff. Because here's our final, how to handle being second guessed in the rapid technology evolution. And then we get into the bonus round. And then we're more or less done with the presentation other than the wrap up. So how do you future-proof your project? Obviously, expectation setting and high levels of communication are critical with your stakeholders. Isolate things that could be commodities. So if there's like a language model inside, don't try to create one of your own. Ask, you can use AWS's, Amazon's model, you can use Google's model, and you can swap it out later if you need to. And then, as Dawn mentioned earlier, track this stuff. The psychology of AI user interactions is key here. This is new stuff. Just this past week, the HBR had a study that shows that when you are using AI to make decisions about hiring, if the AI tells somebody, hey, you didn't get the job, people take that about the same in terms of their reaction is about the same as if a person tells them they didn't get the job. But if you are telling them that they actually got the job or made it to the next stage of the interview, if it's an AI that delivers that news, people will discount it. It doesn't really say good things about them. But if a person conveys that message, even if the AI made that decision, people feel much better about that than they did about the AI. So understand, and there's a whole field of this, right? Understand how the AI is going to affect the people who work with it. That's an important part for you as a project manager to consider. Okay, we're going to go to the lightning bonus round.
We talk about human stuff a lot, but FYI, everybody, if you stay till the end, we'll give you how to get the takeaway, and we'll include the link to the Harvard Business Review article that John just mentioned. So stay for news there. And our extra special bonus tip, John.
Yeah, so AI knows a lot about AI. If you want to know how and why ChatGPT works, ask ChatGPT. Believe it or not, it's a super useful tool for finding out about AI, but it's also a useful research tool for you as a PM, not only to understand the background of projects you might be working on, but to prepare for conversations with experts. The other day, I just asked ChatGPT to put together a project plan for a production system software upgrade, and it did a commendable job. And it provided lots of detail. I asked it to create a risk assessment, did a really good job on the risk assessment, and a work breakdown structure too. These should all be considered first drafts, not final versions. Nonetheless, folks new to project management will find this is a great jump start, and it will likely identify things that would take you much longer to incorporate and fill out on your own. It gives you those outlines. It's awesome. And I know what you grizzled veterans are thinking. You can do it better, and you're right. You've got templates, you've got frameworks, you've got the experience, and that is absolutely true. And two things you need to think about. One is your next audit may be by someone who's using GPT to figure out what they should be looking at, and you should know what they know. And the second thing, and this last bullet is for you, ChatGPT can do a whole lot more for you as a project manager. It can create first drafts of training and onboarding materials. I kid you not, I have seen learning and development professionals just gasp in amazement when they saw what ChatGPT can do for training materials. You need to review it, but these tools will save you hours of time. You can't win if you don't play. Get an account, it's free. Play with it. See what it could do. Challenge it to do your job and see what that looks like. Just don't share any nuclear secrets with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and there were a lot of people in the Mentimeter at the beginning that said, hey, not yet. We're not doing this yet where I am. So it's a great way for you to get ready and get prepared for conversations with experts for sure, because it does actually know a lot about AI. So with that, I think we have a Mentimeter poll, Dr. Hugo, to find out about what everybody's seeing in the audience on our 5 challenges.
We do, absolutely.
And I've shared with our organizers the link to where you can get the takeaway. So we'd be delighted if you want more information, if you want the takeaway with our notes from this session, happy to share that with you. Also, you can go to pmotraining.com/APMUK. And meanwhile,
that will go out by email as well.
Okay, great.
In the meantime, an age-old debate in project management is how much you need to know about a particular domain or how much it's just straightforward project management. So should project managers educate themselves on AI, or can they carry on the way they've been working?
excellent question. And I think when we go back to the types of projects, that's very relevant. So if you're looking to just use an AI that's commercially available to improve or automate a process or to augment quality, then you probably don't need to become an expert in AI. The question becomes, what can the technology do? What are the quality parameters, cost, and the usual decision-making process? Absolutely agree with that. If you're trying to run a project where you're building a machine learning model, and I use that word machine learning model to include all the various kinds of models. I don't want to get into the details there. It's more like a research project, and you're going to be more like a project manager in an R&D or innovation type lab, and less like an operations and process project manager. So it will help you very much when you run into delays or other issues, to have the knowledge so that you know the difference between an algorithm and a model, and you know why hyperparameters are important. You don't have to be a data scientist, but I do think that for those kinds of projects, you really need to have a pretty solid understanding of basically what your researchers are doing. And so that would be my sort of like once over lightly.
Nice. Yeah, and Dr. Hugo, looks like we're at a good spot there. So let's do the next poll, which is a write-in, which is really fun, I think. Is that what we've got? Yeah. So what was your biggest takeaway from the session, everybody? And to answer to my version of the answer to the person who asked that question of what do we need to know about AI as project managers, hopefully you got a little sense of that in the conversation today, that there are some special challenges for AI projects, which is what John and I really wanted to highlight for you, so that if you are a project manager that's done some tech projects before, but you have AI, to cover now, that you know about some of these special challenges in this world, so that you can lead your team to success a little bit more easily, just being aware of the big data challenges, the bias challenges, the uncertain outcomes, the researchy, the way that you can make sure that it's research-based kind of expectation setting that might need to happen so that you can succeed. Because promising that 2 + 2 is 4 in some of these types of projects is not going to work, and it's going to set you up for failure. So hopefully some of these tips have helped to get you ready for at least some of the questions you should ask. And again, we do have a takeaway with our notes so that you can absorb this and reference it later should you end up in that kind of situation. Dr. Hugo, were there any other questions?
So how do you build an AI model that does sanity checks to stop the worst of the mistakes getting through? And how do you build a kill switch on a system that's perhaps live on the internet?
Well, first, if I knew the answer to that definitively, I would probably be sucked up by some, OpenAI or Microsoft to do their stuff. So I'm not going to claim to know the answer to that, but here are a couple of things to think about. Hybrid AI systems are becoming much more popular for exactly that reason. So you've got the machine learning language, the machine learning model underneath. A good example is Bing. I don't know if anyone was tracking what was happening with Bing in the early days when somebody discovered Stanley. Stanley was the sort of like the hidden subconscious maniac underneath Bing. And if you knew the right prompt, you could get it to shed the Bing persona and reveal what was really a very nasty AI that, actually threatened one researcher that he was going to track him down and kill him. I don't know if you heard about that. That was very interesting.
Yes.
And what Microsoft does is they have like the user interface, as it were, to Bing is itself a separately trained model that runs on top of the underlying Stanley to put a really nice face on it and to filter out all of those, all the crazy talk. Many years ago, Microsoft had Tay. Anyone, if anybody remembers Microsoft Tay, good for you. It was a trainable character that they put out on Twitter, and within like 36 hours, it became a Nazi racist lunatic, and they had to shut it down because it was learning from everybody it talked to on Twitter. And so you have to be willing to create layers on top of your model that regulate what comes out of the model. And that's Microsoft's approach, and that's what many hybrid approaches are moving towards, so that there are rules on top of the underlying model that control things. As for kill switch, I think just like any other system that you need a kill switch on, what might you need to kill across what breadth, and you'd have to figure that out on your own. But certainly it's always possible to build in a kill switch.
Yeah, I mean, and even just manually making sure that the conversation happens with your stakeholders about, okay, well, if it goes in this other direction, what's our protocol for making the decision to kill or not? So not necessarily building which, but building the process and the decision process and making sure that, you know, you have the protocol in place and ready should you need to kind of go that way. Obviously with the monitoring and so forth, you know, that you're going to need. Yeah.
So just listening to you talking about Bing, I wondered, is there a real danger that this AI is mimicking reality, in that we've got perfectly good psychopaths who, in the real world, who are also have a layer on top to make sure they sound polite in most of the time?
I forget the title of the book, but it's either the sociopath in the corner office or the psychopath in the corner office, something like that. That is a studied and known phenomenon, and I'll just leave it at that.
Amit has asked, what's the future of AI in construction projects, and what are the challenges of AI in that environment?
Oh, in construction, that's an interesting one, and I'm not an expert in construction, so you know, what I would do if I were in construction and wondering about that is, you know, where is creativity playing a role in construction? And by creativity, I don't just mean like, you know, color choices. I mean, you know, creating plans, creating blueprints and electrical diagrams. I know that Frank Gehry uses technology to figure out how his designs can actually be fabricated, because many of the buildings that he designs cannot actually be built with traditional construction methods. So he uses technology to figure out, okay, how could I build something that looks like, you know, this thing I'm designing? So I think that's, you know, that's a, you know, one way, and that's not just true of construction. I think that's true of many different organizations. Where is creative activity taking place? And creativity, again, writ broadly. And then, you know, how could AI help us there? Because
Yes.
you can brainstorm with ChatGPT and the others. You can say, hey, I've got an idea. Help me think through this. What are some out-of-the-box ways of doing X, right? Another is to just have it, you know, as, you know, classic project management stuff, right? Risk identification and so forth. You can ask it for, you know, are there examples in the world of, you know, great buildings that meet these criteria? Then you get into like the architectural engineering stuff, whether that's, you know, HVAC engineering or elsewise. Use it for use it to help you do optimization around, you know, should we be using heat pumps instead of traditional fossil fuel, you know, HVAC systems and so forth. Again, just speculating, but I think the key is start with some interesting questions and see what ChatGPT says.
Yes.
These are the early days. Become the expert.
Yeah, it was a great
I think some of it also is the standard project management stuff of this schedule isn't likely as well.
You could, oh, absolutely. I mean, if you, yeah, it can. I have not tried it, but it is my understanding that ChatGPT can even do resource leveling, which is always a wake-up call for me whenever I'm putting together a project plan. Like, oh, this looks great. Let's do the resource leveling. Oh, this looks terrible.
Yeah, we've been doing that for years in Microsoft Project, right? Like, oh, this is good. Okay, we can get there. We can make it. And then you hit the resource leveling button, and it takes 5 years more than you expected.
Right.
I mean,
but it would be interesting, Dawn, to put together like take a whole database of project plans and basically known outcomes. Okay, here was the plan. Okay, and then here was the actual delivery date and budget, you know, actual. and have it run some, just feed that into the machine learning model and have it come out with a prediction engine where you could then give it a plan and have it come back with a most likely budget and most likely delivery date.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff we could do for sure. Thanks to everybody who reviewed. I was looking at your takeaways. I love them. They're so good. The personal action plan slide so that you can do some thinking, extra thinking perhaps, about what you can do with what you learned today. And then we can also share again some of the takeaways that you can get. So creating your personal action plan, we love practical, we love taking action. Please, please, please self-reflect on what you learned today. Thinking about the project types you're dealing with, thinking about the industry that you're in, like, construction or medical or wherever you are, and what you can learn from and think about from this, so that you're ready for the future, so that you're not taken over by the robots, right? So get ready, use this to get ready, and think about the differences between what you've seen here in your organizations. John gave you lots of examples, that he's seen in the AI side. Is there anything that you can recommend in your organization, for instance, to use AI for good and not evil, obviously? So what kinds of pro tips can you apply from what we've shared today? And how can you use some of these tools that are out there to help you learn more and maybe even plan your next projects better, or the projects that you're running now, whether they're AI projects or not? So lots that you can do. Hopefully you can do with that today. And on the next slide, I just want to share.
Before we go to the next slide, Donna, I just want to mention that last point. See how much of your own job ChatGPT can do. I think that's if you play with it that way, you'll get a much better understanding, because you're the expert. See what it knows about your greatest area of expertise.
I love it. I love it. It's terrifying, but definitely try it out. Harness the courage. Yeah. So we've got, I have a tip, a course on Udemy about project management and Agile. It's got lots of captions if you run a global team, 5-minute videos you can learn anywhere. And we've also, if you love, kind of learning more from John, and it happens to be my show or whatever, there's another webinar that we did inside PMO training, inside Project Guru Academy on LinkedIn, and we can get you the link to that. So you can learn more about AI in project land if you like. So just sign up on pmotraining.com/APMUK, and we can also let you know we're so excited. The ROI Institute is putting out a book within the next month, and we'd love to share it with you if you're interested. Our case study is included. As you can see here, it says case studies from top leadership development programs, and our case study is in there, so we'd be happy to share it with you when it comes out. If you let us know that you're interested, you just check the little box there. So we'd love to continue to help you on your professional development journey. If you'd like some more information, just let us know here on the special secret page we created just for you.
And Hugo, is there one more question that you feel we really ought to cover before we wrap up?
Yes, it's a kind of strange one. Some AI project proponents are a lot more bullish about AI than you are. Do you think their confidence is misplaced?
I've been through multiple hype cycles on AI. So my skepticism is partly the result of having, seen the ups and downs over the years. I remember when expert systems were going to revolutionize the world, and instead they became useful tools and for some use cases, but didn't change the world all that much. I do think this time is different. I do think AI has crossed a threshold where it is going to solve many more problems across a broad range of areas. However, the current sets of models that are being used, the language models, the image models, they do not have understanding of the world built into them. There is no notion of people as actors in the world with motivations. There's no understanding of the relationships between objects in those models. If you go to ChatGPT and ask how it works, it will tell you these are just statistical relationships amongst words, and based on the words that you gave as a prompt, it's just going to create what it believes are the most likely next words to follow on a purely statistical basis. It's an incredible statistical model, and it creates something that is jaw-droppingly amazing. But until the AI can actually model what's happening in the world and have what you might call common sense, I don't think the predictions that are being made for that whole general intelligence is going to come to fruition. There are some problems that are incredibly hard, that are trivial for humans, that will not be solved for quite some time. There will be no robot butlers in our near future.
I was really hoping for one, John. I really was. But
I'm sorry to break the news for you. The real danger to job loss, frankly, is anybody whose job involves information processing.
Yeah, I did hear an interesting one about robot butlers in a restaurant in Japan, where the robots are actually controlled by people with physical disabilities who wouldn't otherwise have a job. So it's creating jobs.
I
Right.
just got calls from that.
But that's a real human intelligence behind it.
Yes.
In some sense, what you really have there is a cyborg.
As it's having conversations with the customers as well, and it means that someone who is unable to get out is able to have real conversations out in the real world.
Yeah, I know it's kind of weird science fiction-y. I read a lot of science fiction. That's more of a cyborg than a robot in my book, but
yes.
There are all these different. You got to get into the models, right? Into the language. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I love that question. Thank you so much for that question, for hanging on. We still have over 100 people with us, so let's thank everybody on the next slide here, and invite you. We really would love for you to link in with us and let us know what you thought of this, see us out there. We occasionally do talks. We're considering doing a course together. We've been talking about it for a long time, and so please, follow us, link in with us. We'd love to hear from you and stay in touch with you. So you can see here some of our information if you'd like to connect. We'd love to hear from you too. And I just want to thank you so much again, Dr. Hugo, for being wonderful, wonderful host for this webinar and allowing us to get together with all of your audience here that was interested in AI today. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much for this fantastic talk. It lived up to my expectations, and I know both of you from previous webinars. It really did. I really enjoyed it, and I think, judging by the conversations that we're having on chat, it's been really good. There's a lot of thank yous coming through.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. We love what we do and love to share it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again.